Welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for our journey today as we talk about a contemporary issue. Today we're going to be talking about the Exodus series that the public intellectual Jordan Peterson is putting out in cooperation with the Daily Wire. That's the network that commentator Ben Shapiro and businessman Jeremy Boring put together, and they now incorporate a number of different individuals like Matt Walsh, Candace Bergen, and others who are participating in that network. And Jordan Peterson now has joined forces, and he's putting out some content. And what he's doing now is he's commenting on the different books of the Bible. And he's done this for a number of different years now. He's put out a lecture series on the book of Exodus, but now he's going to sit down and he's going to give some public lectures in large venues. Before, he's a university professor up in Toronto, and he's a psychologist, and he's lectured in the classroom on the book of Exodus. And he comes at the Bible from a psychological standpoint, from almost a Freudian kind of psychoanalytic, more Jungian. Carl Jung was a psychologist, and he taught that there were universal signs and symbols in all of the world literature and the world religions, and they all point back to a common humanity that through the years humans developed concepts that meant universal application. And so Jordan Peterson finds these in the Bible. Now, he has been lecturing on biblical books and bringing out what he says are the universal symbols and signs in the Bible that all of humanity share and relate to the great questions of life. You know, who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? Those kind of big existential questions. Jordan Peterson has been showing from the Bible that a lot of these stories and the symbols and the signs that we see in the Bible resonate to all people because they're basically telling the same story, addressing them slightly different in different cultures. Now, you have to understand a little bit about Jordan Peterson. We're going to play this clip here and introducing this Exodus series. It's a 4-part couple hours each part, roundtable where Jordan Peterson is going through the book of Exodus and touching on some of the more popular stories in the book of Exodus. And he's trying to bring out the meaning of these stories from a psychiatric point of view. You might say a Jungian, symbolic. He could also bring in someone like Joseph Campbell, the late Joseph Campbell, who worked a lot in these symbols that religion brings to our understanding of some of the universal questions. But you have to understand that Jordan Peterson is an atheist. He is not a believer in God. He does not believe in the Judeo-Christian God, in anything other than a sign of the highest value that we hold to on our hierarchy of values. And so I'm going to try to explain this. This is very, very ironic and very almost comical that an atheist professor from Canada would try to therefore give public lectures on the book of Exodus. And he's already done this kind of thing with the book of Genesis. And why is an atheist going around filling up large venues talking about the books of the Bible when he doesn't even believe that these stories actually took place? Or he might say he doesn't know whether they took place or whether they actually took place in the way that we read them in the Bible. But evidently he doesn't care whether they're true or not in the historical sense. All he's working with are the storylines and the universal themes they touch on. And so we're dealing with someone who is different in many respects from your typical Bible scholar or Bible teacher. And this is something that I want to raise questions about. I want to say, well, wait a minute, why are we meaning Christians who do profess Christianity and who do take our faith seriously, why are we listening to and being influenced by an atheist who's trying to teach us what the Bible really means? Not that he doesn't have insights into some aspects of what his system of Jungian psychology means when we apply it to the Bible, but why are we getting excited about his reading of the Bible when in fact he is not reading the Bible correctly at a most fundamental level? And that is, he's not taking the Bible as seriously as the Bible takes itself. The Bible takes itself as a historical book. The Bible says that, for example, God spoke to Noah and said, there will be a universal flood. Get a boat ready, and I will instruct you. Okay, that is a historical event. The Bible depicts that as a historical event. And so as believers, as Christians who trust in God, we have to do the same. We have to assume that this is a historical event and then work out what the implications of that historical event mean in our lives many years removed. But the foundation is that you have to actually believe in the events of the Bible to be a believer. Same way with the resurrection of Christ. It really does matter whether the cross of Christ actually took place and Jesus was killed, crucified on the cross, and did rise from the dead. It really matters. And I'm sure that there are signs and symbols and universal human issues that the cross addresses on a psychoanalytic level, but that's not the foundation of our faith. And so Jordan Peterson is getting the cart before the horse. He's trying to then look at the accounts, the stories, the narrative, and say, well, let's forget about whether it's actually true in the sense of history, and let's move right into the meaning and symbol of what it means universally to all human beings. Well, no, you can't do that, because the meaning and purpose of the event is also tied up with its actual happening. And so that's why I look at what's taking place at this 4-part Exodus series, and I say this is kind of a comedy, because you have an atheist, an actual atheist, who does not believe in the substantive, real existence of a being called God. And he'll say, well, I believe in God, but I don't believe, he won't say he doesn't believe in the substance reality of God, but he will simply say, I believe in the word God, and I believe in the idea of God, and I believe that God is the highest ideal that we as humans can think of and conceive of and commit our lives to. Well, that's a difference between there being an objective reality called God. So let's roll this video clip and actually hear what this trailer is going to describe the 4-part series.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Turns out that a book is more durable than stone. It's more durable than a castle. It's more durable than an empire. You don't get away with anything. And so you might think you can bend the fabric of reality, and that you can treat people instrumentally, and that you can bow to the tyrant and violate your conscience without cost.
Okay, here's the, I'm going to jump in here for the trailer because I see this shot here. This is the panel of experts that he has brought in to discuss the book of Exodus, excuse me. And some of these men I'm familiar with. This is Dennis Prager, the Jewish conservative radio talk show host, who is also somewhat of a scholar. He's written some commentaries on the book of Exodus, for one. He's trying to write a commentary on the entire, what we call Old Testament. He calls Tanakh, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. That's what the Jewish people refer to the Old Testament as, the Tanakh. And then he also has some Oxford scholars. I believe this man is an Oxford scholar, this man, or Cambridge, Oxford or Cambridge. This is a college president of a college I've never heard of before. I'm not sure where it is either, but he seems to be interested in reviving the tradition of Western tradition and the values. This is Jonathan Paju, who is, I think he's more of a sort of a mystical, religious author and advocate of the non-rational aspects of religion and the symbolic aspects of religion. And he seems to be a favorite of Jordan Peterson because he uses a lot of Jungian symbols and references. This, let's see, Os Guinness right here, Os Guinness is an evangelical Christian. And he is well known in evangelical circles. And he has written many books, and I own a couple of his books, so I'm familiar with him. But I want to see where Os Guinness comes down on this kind of discussion. This sort of what you'll see as this goes on is Jordan Peterson brings in, like I was saying before, he brings in this Carl Jungian flavor to biblical interpretation, and I'm interested to see how Os Guinness reacts to that, because Oz is a evangelical Bible-believing Christian and was for many years working in conjunction with Francis Schaeffer, the late great evangelical theologian and thinker. And I could guarantee you that Francis Schaeffer would not go in for this allegorical, symbolic reinterpretation of the Bible. He would take a more Reformation historical, grammatical understanding of the Bible. So, I want to see what Os Guinness has to say about all this, because he actually should be speaking up and saying, no, wait a minute, we have to lay the foundation first on the historical narrative aspect, and then we can go into what some of these stories can be applied and used in understanding our own times and so forth, our own lives. But so that's a rundown of the panel.
You will pay the piper. It's going to call you out of that slavery into freedom, even if that pulls you into the desert.
So that's sort of a sample of how he's approaching this. He allegorizes the whole thing. He talks about you have to be willing to, in the Exodus story, you have to be willing to leave your slavery, even if it means heading out into the desert of your life. And you can see, you can get that angle. He's trying to spiritualize the stories, and that's okay, but you have to, it's not okay if you go crazy with that and you don't have any kind of reason within the story or the text of the Bible to do that in and of itself. But this is a technique that was used by a few early Christians, many early Christians, some of the church fathers, most famously by a theologian in the early church fathers name, he wasn't a father, but he was a theologian, Origen, and he allegorized the stories of the Old Testament specifically. And the Reformation, though, many years later came along and said, no, wait a minute, that is not a legitimate way of interpreting the Bible, because basically it puts the authority of the text and the story of the Bible in the hands of the person interpreting it. And whatever creative juices that person brings to the table, he can therefore make a story mean anything he wants to simply by spiritualizing it or allegorizing it or symbolic meaning, pulling symbolic meanings here and there. And this means, like the Nile River represents this, and the Pharaoh represents this, and this taskmaster represents this, and you can put a meaning and you'll build a whole narrative around this subjective interpretation that has no grounding in the actual theology of the Bible, other than the interpreter says it has meaning for the interpreter. So The Reformation came along and said, no, we have to stick to the historical plain sense meaning of the text. And we can apply certain situations in the stories and in the accounts of the Bible and learn from them. But no, that's not the driving force of our interpretation. Our driving force of interpretation is the historical aspect and what the text says of itself and what the text is trying to convey in and of itself, not our own subjective interpretation of it. So Jordan Peterson is coming at it from a non-Reformation aspect, and he's trying to incorporate a lot of the allegorical interpretation, which is very, very dangerous. So I'm going to wait and see if any of these members of the panel here will actually raise that problem. Because some of these men, like I said, Os Guinness is an evangelical Christian. Is he going to let Jordan Peterson basically get away with using this allegorical interpretation technique throughout the whole book of Exodus? Now, I'm only on the first episode of the Exodus series. So they're 2 hours each, the episodes. So I'm halfway through the first episode. But you're already getting a lot of the Jungian, the psychiatrist Carl Jung, the Jungian interpretation of literature only applied to the Bible in that case. And that's what Jordan Peterson does. He takes Jung, he's a disciple of Carl Jung, and he takes the Jungian psychology and understanding of symbols and applies them to the Bible. And he's all excited about that. Now, the question is, should we as Christians get all excited about it with Jordan Peterson? On one level, you want to say, hey, whenever you have some grown men gathered around a table talking about the Bible, that's a good thing, right? Well, yeah, in one sense. But if they're using this highly subjective interpretive method, the allegorical method, we have to say, well, wait, there are dangers in that. Do you understand what you're doing? I don't think they do understand, at least Jordan Peterson, I don't think he understands what he's doing and what the dangers are of that, of doing it that way. What you get then is you get an atheist like Jordan Peterson. I'll come back to that later because I'll explain why he is an atheist. You get an atheist like Jordan Peterson lecturing and talking about the Bible as if he understands. Well, no. If you're an atheist and you don't even understand and believe in and trust these truths as objective history, then you're in no position to be lecturing on the Bible. I'm sorry. You can come at it from a technical viewpoint, like a lot of liberal scholars do, where they actually study the Hebrew and the Greek, and they are, from a purely detached viewpoint, they have no personal commitment to the text because they don't believe it. Well, the same way with Jordan Peterson. He can be totally detached from the actual reality of these stories and yet really get excited about them, the symbolic aspect of it. Well, I guess the Lord can use a lot of ways to lead a person to himself, but this is not what the church wants to get into. It doesn't want to see this brought into the churches, and certainly we don't want to see pastors doing this on Sunday mornings, because this is not the way you interpret the Bible. It's not the way you approach the faith, the written text. It's not the way the Bible approaches itself. And so there are a lot of red lights that should be going on to any Christian who's thought through these things and saying, hey, this is dangerous. But let me look at the trailer a little bit further.
God is ethic-centered, not ethnic-centered.
Well, do you want the Pharaoh on your side or do you want God on your side? That's kind of the question.
There's a profound sense here that what is going on with the Israelites is the contrast to Pharaoh, right? Like, under no terms will you go, and the Israelites had to say, we will go under any terms.
And we're going to see that there's something else going on here that is far more cosmic and deeper than what you can imagine.
The highest.
Okay, so that's an example of Jonathan Paju is talking about. There's far something deeper and more spiritual than you can imagine just by reading the story. See, there's that allegorizing, spiritualizing, and this is actually leading in a direction of an ancient sort of a philosophy that sort of came into Christianity and attempted to take over things called Gnosticism. Whereas you look at the Bible and you look at the account, say, of the Exodus, and you say, well, yeah, that's fine, but there's a deeper meaning to the Exodus, and we know the understanding. We understand the meaning of it. It's a secret truth. You have to be initiated into our esoteric religion to truly understand the purpose and meaning of the Bible and the stories in the Bible and the symbols and signs in the Bible. So it's a lot more complex than just reading the story of the Exodus in the Bible. That's where this Jonathan Paju seems to be coming from, and that's an ancient heresy that was rejected by the early church. They said, no, the Old Testament accounts of, for example, Pharaoh resisting Moses, requesting the Hebrews to leave Egypt. You have to get to the historical understanding of what actually took place, because God is trying to say something through the history of the events that occurred. And so you have to understand the history. And then once you understand the history, you have to step back and say, what is God doing? Because it's all about God. This will be another criticism I'll have of this series. It's just an hour or so in. The focus seems to be all on man and what the symbolic meaning of these events in the Exodus account mean to man. And I began to become uncomfortable watching this because I'm thinking, no, wait a minute. This Bible is given by God, and it's there to reveal God to us, and it's there to reveal the character of God and the will of God and the plan of God and how we are to relate to God. But this discussion that Jordan Peterson is conducting, it seems to be on a human, man-centered level. What is this? What does the Pharaoh mean to us in our lives? What does Moses, who comes in and challenges power, mean to us in our lives? It's all about how we understand ourselves in this world, rather than saying, okay, what is God saying to us through the Exodus? What is God trying to teach us through the Exodus? What is God trying to teach us about himself through the Exodus? What can we learn about the character of God? And that kind of stuff. Instead, I'm getting a lot of man-centered human psychology, and really the first hour was very little said about God himself, which is not the way the Bible is to be read. The Bible is a God-centered book, revealed by God. It's revelation of God to us. So we need to read it in the sense of we're looking at what God is revealing to us, and not trying to look at the symbols and the allegorical understanding of why things happen on earth and try to figure it out, some kind of rational understanding. This is where it becomes dangerous. I think if we see churches and pastors taken in by Jordan Peterson on the Bible, we'll get a lot of confusion, which is not what we want. We want clarity. That's what the Bible brings.
Ethical spirit to which we're beholden is presented precisely as that spirit that allies itself with the cause of freedom against tyranny. And
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it here and talk about Jordan Peterson's definition of God. I don't know if you caught that, but he actually said that that God is, and this is his understanding, you can look at other lectures that he gives, God is our highest ideal that we aspire to. God is the highest value that we have on our values charts. God is our greatest understanding of reality. God is this, God is that. But notice that he never talks about God as a personal being who has a will and a plan for us. No, it's all couched in this psychological understanding of God. So he can say, I have come to believe in God, meaning that he comes to recognize that he understands his highest value and highest aspiring destination. And no, that's sort of psychobabble. The Bible is much more clear. The Bible talks about there is a being, a personality, all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipotent, who we are to serve and love, minus all of the gobbledygook of psychology. And that is one of the things that we really need to be careful in dealing with Jordan Peterson. This sort of assuming that once you've tried to interpret something from a psychological, sort of Jungian psychology perspective, then you've understood all of Christianity or the Judeo-Christian tradition. No. You're only coming at it from one angle, and that angle is not what historic Christianity has come at the Bible. So I would hope to believe that we're not seeing a new religious Gnostic teacher arise, but if this becomes so big, that's exactly what it could become. He could become a cult leader in one sense.
Hey, I want villains to get punished.
But do you want the villains to learn before they have to pay the ultimate price?
That's such a Christian question.
Okay, so that is the trailer. And as you can see, you've got this round table with an Orthodox Jew, Dennis Prager. You have an evangelical Christian, Oz Guinness. And then you have sort of a esoteric, Gnostic, you might say, Christian that maybe is like a throwback to the early centuries of the Christian church, where Gnosticism was vying for power within the church power structures. And thankfully, and thanks to God, it was rejected, because if it hadn't been rejected, we would be getting this kind of Bible interpretation. Now, I do have to say that some of the most respected and famous theologians of the early Christian years, for example, like Augustine, the great Augustine, who just has written voluminously about theology and commentaries, and one of the most, if not the most influential thinkers of all of Christian history, he did resort on occasion to allegorical interpretation of the Bible. So he would go along, and if he didn't understand something, let's say that he came across the passage of Balaam's donkey. And if you're familiar with the passage, Balaam's donkey actually speaks to Balaam, talks to Balaam. So Augustine, I'm not sure, I haven't read this in Augustine, but he might, in the early days at least, he might try to solve that seeming problem by saying, well, the donkey speaking is an allegory of how sometimes the brute beasts can see the truth of God before we supposed rational humans do, and so on and so forth. So he tried to make a spin on that. But for the most part, he did not do that. He did not go too far into that direction, nowhere near like Origen, like I mentioned before. And you also see that allegorical understanding in the Catholic tradition. You see Thomas Aquinas, his commentaries, he'll play with that. But for the most part, no. They did actually stay closer to the text. But we don't want to go in that direction. And so that would be a warning that, hey, Jordan Peterson, we're glad he's excited about this. I'm glad he's getting people reading the Bible. I'm glad he's stirring up interest in like Genesis and Exodus. But no, the whole approach is misguided. We'll see you back next week. I'll have more to talk about on this topic. God bless.